All right, so welcome in. Today, this is a Great Lakes ROTA-RC presentation. This is the third and final in the series of Changing Families, Changing Outcomes, Compassionate Responses to Substance Use in the Family. We want to welcome everybody in, whether this is your first time viewing the series or you're back again for another session. We welcome you and we're glad to have you here. We have a few housekeeping items that we need to take care of before I hand it over to our presenters. So I'm going to take care of those quickly now. And then I will do just that and I'll hand it over to Pam. So the first is just to acknowledge our funding acknowledgement, and that is that we are a Great Lakes ROTA-RC funded project through SAMHSA, which means that we provide training and technical assistance to the rural communities of Health and Human Services Region 5, which covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. But if you're outside that region, don't panic. We're happy to have you here. We're glad to welcome anybody in. It just means that we direct the most of our work to that region. Our website is listed there. Don't panic. We will absolutely make sure that we pop that into the chat later towards the end of our presenters webinar. Moving now, I just want to show you a brief overview of our website to entice you a little bit to go check it out after you hear our webinar today. This is a little bit of what we offer through our regional products. Obviously, virtual education is a big part of what we do, but we also have newsletter articles that give you a flavor of what goes on within our virtual regional community. The technical assistance that we provide, there's some description of what that looks like. We provide community toolkits and resources that you can access through technical assistance or through our website. We try to provide news and updates that connect with our partners within the region and nationally, also through some of our local community updates and connections. And then we try to stay abreast of funding announcements that are available and relevant to the partners that we work with. So go ahead and check us out. This is a brief snapshot of what our newsletter looks like. If you're not currently signed up to the newsletter, please make sure that you check it out. Connect with us, shoot myself, Lauren, or Jen a chat, and we're more than happy to help you get connected to our newsletter. It helps you stay up to date of what's happening in our region, within your states or nationally. The last thing that I just want to do is kind of set the tone of the learning environment that we're setting today. And that's just to remind you that at ROTA-RC, we promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. We try to encourage non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can help reduce negative bias and promote successful engagement in treatment and recovery. And with that, we welcome you all into today's learning session. With that, I want to welcome Pam Lanhart, our presenter today. She is the founder of the Thrive Family Recovery Resources organization, which is a Minnesota nonprofit recovery community organization created specifically to support family members impacted by their loved one's substance use. Pam is a certified peer recovery specialist. She serves on the Minnesota Governor's Advisory Council for Substance Use and is passionate about assisting families to respond to substance use with compassion, empathy, and kindness based on evidence-based best practices. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pam.
All right, thank you, Jen, for that introduction. And I'm going to pop up the screen share. Let's just take a minute to get that up. All right. Well, again, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today on the last of the three-part series, Changing Families, Changing Outcomes, Compassionate Responses to Substance Use in the Family. And hopefully you all will have an opportunity to go back and look at the other 2 weeks. So we're jumping into kind of the last third of this. And there's a couple things I want to just reiterate with the presentation. One is that we work directly with families to help them change sort of the way that they walk through this with their loved one. And so when I talk about you or the people I work with, I'm making the assumption that you are working with the family members. So it might be your families, or you might be a family member on here. So from that context, we can take a lot of this, if you're a professional working in the field, and take a lot of this information and apply it to how you're interacting with families. So we're modeling behaviors that help family members learn how to walk through this in a different way. So in the first session, we really talked a lot about why families matter, why it's important for families to understand substance use, understand their values, how they can show up in this. And then, yes, last week we dug into some of the communications tools and skills that are critical for changing the way we interact with our family members. So these are motivational interviewing skills that are really adapted to language that is affirming and really equips family members with how can I interact differently. There are so many times when families get the message that there's nothing that they can do. And I remember hearing that. Now, maybe that's not exactly what was said, but I heard that. Like, oh, you have to wait for them to hit rock bottom. You have to detach. You have to disconnect. And as you know, that connection is critical, and that families have the most influence in their loved ones' continuum of care. Families are there from the beginning until the remission of the disease. So we're going to jump into some of the additional tools and skills that really help families walk through this in a more intentional way. So last week we talked about motivational interviewing. We talked about change talk. And so when you hear change talk, we can respond to that using those skills of validation, affirmation, summary, open-ended questions, and gaining consent. So we're going to jump into this section, which is what happens when someone is ambivalent. And if you remember the stages of change, and throughout the whole stages of change, we talk about pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then action. And so a lot of times in the process of change, there is something called ambivalence. And I imagine that you've all heard that word, but just think about what that means to you personally. So ambivalence is normal, but ambivalence is really that I want two things at the same time. So I just always relate this back to my own life and my own change process. Like I may want to get healthy, but I may not want to stop drinking my coffee with heavy cream in it in the morning. Or I may want to lose 5 pounds, but I'm still running to the cupboard at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every time I'm bored. And so ambivalence is that idea that new behaviors compete with the old ones. So in change talk, what that looks like is, I really know I need to stop. I know I need to be a good mother. And, I just can't imagine going through withdrawals, or I can't imagine giving up the feeling that I get. I don't know how I'm going to deal with my anxiety. That's ambivalence. They're acknowledging the need to change, and especially in opiate use disorder, I have rarely met anybody that has become, and most addiction with opiates sneaks up on people. Like it really catches people by surprise. Or even meth. People will say, I tried it once. I was using amphetamines. I used Adderall. I even misused it. So I thought a little's good, a lot would be better. I started using meth and it caught me immediately. And in general, especially with opiates, the detox is so painful. People understand that they're in trouble. And yet they have such a hard time stopping, and families will label this as unwillingness or denial. And yet when somebody says, I know I need to stop, that's not denial. And that's not even unwillingness. Like I'm really willing to want to lose those 10 pounds. It's just that there's things that are competing with those, with that goal. And so ambivalence is that stage in the stages of change where someone recognizes the need to change, there's competing factors, right? I just got a call today. This gal wants to go into treatment. She has a dog. Okay. She doesn't want to not live without her dog. That's ambivalence. So sometimes we have to take some extra time to sort of help with some of those barriers that might occur when someone wants to get in and get help. Maybe ambivalence looks like, well, I've already been to treatment 24 times. It doesn't work for me, but I know I need to do something. That's ambivalence. And we can help overcome some of those obstacles. Now, in ambivalence, there are some processes that can be really, really helpful. We're going to talk about them: reinforcing positive behaviors, allowing for natural consequences, and remembering that no one size fits all. And that is really critical because we often get stuck in what worked for us or what we think will work for them. For example, I get a lot of families that come to me and say they need long-term treatment. They need long-term treatment, like 6 months to a year. And convincing them that, like institutionalizing someone isn't necessarily helpful, but we can get long-term recovery supports. So in their mind, they're thinking long-term treatment. And we, as professionals, might have to shift that thinking, which is, well, typically, we look at these stages as, residential treatment is like the ICU, and then PHP or IOP might be like general surge floor, and then they can go into IOP and sober living, which is like the outpatient portion of care. So comparing it to other medical processes can really help families understand that sometimes it's not, isolation in a long-term treatment program or confinement, because we talked last week about extrinsic versus intrinsic. So we're helping them build intrinsic motivation. And there is an exercise in your packet. Ambivalence is normal. And I really want you to think about your own process of change and how ambivalence played a role in that. Sometimes when we look at our own behaviors and our own need to change and our desire to make change, and we understand how this process has worked for us, it helps us show empathy and compassion and put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So think about a time when you were ambivalent. And then if you think about what was most helpful in that, and we talked a little bit about that last week, what's most helpful in ambivalence is non-judgment and support and walking with someone, but not doing for them. But we're also going to talk about the process of allowing for natural consequences. In ambivalence, this is where it's really important to not interfere with the negative consequences that occur in this process. Now, we're not punishing, and I want to be very clear, this is not punishment. This is, I'm going to step out of the way. So in some circles, the words that might be used here are we're not going to enable their substance use. We don't use the word enabling in our work. And the reason we don't use it is because it really puts a lot of shame on families. Mothers call me and say, I am just the biggest enabler. I'm an enabler. I'm codependent. And I'm like, absolutely, you are doing what feels natural for you. It is natural for you to want to save your child's life. Now, how we do this is important. And so we guide families to step out of the way of those natural consequences. So that might look like, I'm not going to call in sick. Now, actually with partners in the partner relationship, this is even harder because you might have a wife who stays at home, raises her kids, or doesn't have a high income, and their partner is the breadwinner, and natural consequences could mean, that their kids don't have food on the table, right? So this is where that no one size fits all approach really comes into play. No judgment on the mother that doesn't want to, let her kids starve, or is really afraid about not having an income if their partner loses their job, or what happens if you own a home together, and if they don't pay the mortgage, they're gonna get kicked out of their home or evicted from their home. And those are really difficult things to sort through, which is why we work with the family to go, okay, you can't do this, but what can you do? And so some of those natural consequences might be like they're driving, they get picked up for DUI, you're not gonna pay for an attorney, or you're not gonna post bond for them, right? Or it may be that someone they owe someone money, and oftentimes there can be emotional and manipulation in this process. So, they might come and say, if I don't pay my drug dealer $100 tomorrow, they're going to beat me up. And that scares the heck out of family members. Like, they are really afraid for their loved one, and often for good reason. So the ambivalence in the family member is there as well. So helping them sort through, well, of course we don't want you to perpetuate harm, but at the same time, sometimes it may not be true, and they have to decide, what can I support, what can't I support, what natural consequences can I step out of the way of. And when we're just stepping out of the way of natural consequences, it keeps us out of that bad guy role. We're not punishing, we're not creating those natural consequences, and that helps us maintain that relationship. So some of those natural consequences are listed here. I remember, and this is a true story with my son. On his graduation day, he called me that morning, and he was in active use at the time, could barely speak, and got removed from the graduation ceremony practice session because he could barely stand up and walk. So he called me that day. And I mean, this was a tough one, right? I'm a mother. He finally is going to graduate, which was just a miraculous thing in the first place, and he can't show up. And the school essentially called me and said, if he doesn't sober up, he can't walk. And I had to allow for those natural consequences. When he called me and told me that, I just said, wow, that sounds really hard. What are you going to do today? How are you going to make this better? And then we just told him, we'll be there. And we didn't know if he was going to be there or not. We didn't help him at all that day. And if he would have missed his graduation ceremony, we were prepared for that. We knew enough of his friends and enough of the graduates where we were wanting to go anyway. So we sat in the bleachers waiting to see if when they called his name, he would be there. And it turned out okay, but we just didn't interfere with that, right? People will sometimes ask, like, they get a paycheck or they get a check in the mail. Should I, not give him that paycheck? And I'm like, don't get in the way of that. That's his money legally. He has a right to that money. And it might mean that he spends it all in the next couple of days. Make sure he's safe, because we talk about harm reduction. If he has money, make sure that he's safe if he does use. And, when he's out of money, then you don't give him any more money. And that's the natural consequence of him spending the money that he does have. And sometimes I'll remind family members that that is not the worst thing that could happen, right? So staying out of those things that might precipitate natural consequences are very, very important. And then when they come to you and they're upset, oh, I lost my job again, you don't shame them in that, right? Remember, we talked about those skills last week. You don't say, well, of course you lost your job. You haven't showed up one day this week. We say, wow, that's really hard. What are you going to do about that? Or that's really hard. I'm so sorry that happened. And then you put a period on the end of it. right? You don't offer to help, you don't offer to get in the middle of that. And I always remember in these instances that when our loved ones come to us with a story, we only know a part of that story. And so always keeping in mind, I have a lot of mothers that jump in and want to sort of make excuses for their kids, especially. And we have to, we have to really keep in mind that we don't ever know the whole story. We might know just the tip of the iceberg. And I used to observe that, my son would tell me maybe 1 or 2% of the story, and then there was 90% that I didn't know. So it was like the tip of an iceberg, right? So the other way that we can help with moving through those stages of change is reinforcing positive behaviors. Now, we talked a little bit about affirmations last week, but this goes a step further, and this is really noticing and increasing behaviors that you want to see more of. In the recovery field, they call this contingency management. Recovery is not about subtraction, it is about addition. And so when we are helping to reinforce the positive behaviors, we're showing them and we're watering the behaviors we want to see grow, right? So we're pulling the weeds sometimes of those negative behaviors, while at the same time, we're reinforcing the positive behaviors that they are doing. Now, we get a lot of bite back on this at times because we will have people come and say, there's nothing positive happening in his world right now. Like, he's just using all the time. There is a worksheet in the craft process, which is called the functional analysis, and it helps us sort of understand the patterns of use in our loved ones and kind of going through that, like, okay, it feels like they're using all the time, but really, are they using all the time? And what happens with this is when we're looking for the good, it changes our brain patterns as a family member. And then it also changes and reinforces behaviors in the loved one. I always tell this little story. Years ago, I was just doing a very, very part-time care job when I was raising my kids. I was taking care of a quadriplegic. And one day she made a comment and she said, "Oh my gosh, you do my hair better than any of my other staff." And what happened in that was that it made me want to do her hair all the time and even better. So that simple verbal affirmation was so important to my work with her. So how we do that is and there's our worksheet and there's a T-bar. So you want to think about things that you can reinforce and then ways you can reinforce them. So an example, especially if you have youngsters and they're maybe getting them to therapy has been like, a super difficult process. So when I talk to families about that and their kiddo actually does go to therapy, I'm like, stop at Starbucks and buy them a, Starbucks or whatever they like, go to Crumbles and get them a cookie, or in Colorado, you would take them to Voodoo Donuts, right? Sometimes just those small little things, and what that does is it creates connection. So finding ways to reinforce those positive behaviors makes a huge difference. I'm going to tell you another story because I love stories, but I was working with mom. We work nationally, and I had a mom who lived in Minnesota, but her son was on the streets unhoused in LA, which, as you can imagine, was just so scary for her. And you can get lost in that population. And what happened is that he showed up at a social services agency, gave that social service worker his phone numbers and called mom. So they came up with a strategy that every time he came into the agency, when he came in, there would be a $5 gift card for him for Subway. So mom took care of that. Mom bought the gift card, sent it to the social service agency. And he started coming in, and guess what? He showed up every single week, right? And you see this in harm reduction clinics. This is the concept: is when you come in, we're going to make sure that you have the needs met that you have, right? That's positive reinforcement. And then the hope is that there would be linkage to additional care and recovery supports through that process. So in this instance, that kiddo kept coming in, and mom found out where he was. Mom went out to LA, and within an hour, she had found her son. He ended up back in Minnesota, never actually went to treatment, but ended up, really, really embracing music as his recovery pathway. And he's about 7 years in recovery now. So leaning in too. So, okay, they love music, and that's something that brings them joy. And everything in you might want to say, well, stop playing your music and just get a job. But that music is sort of a lifeline for them. Support that. You might decide you want to pay for Spotify every month so that they have that music. Those are ways that we can use our money to support change and recovery rather than to support the substance use disorders. So just think about and leaning in behaviors, for a wife or a partner or a husband in this, that might look like they come in at 4:30 every day and they open a beer. And one day they come in at 4:30 and they don't open a beer, and you notice it. And 5, they're still not drinking. So you say, wow, like, this has been a really great half hour since you've been home. Let's go take a walk together, right? That would be a leaning in behavior where you notice when they're not using, or when they're not in their problematic behaviors, and you reinforce that. For younger kids too, that could be a restoration of privileges. I just met with a family the other day, and one of the things that came up, and this was really helpful for the mom and dad. This was a kiddo who was 16, wanted to get his phone back, and it was like, such a big goal. I think they were it was like, if you do these certain things for a month, then you'll get your phone back, which was such a big, far out goal that he could never achieve it. So we shifted that to, if you get your chores done every day, then the reinforcement of that would be that you have your phone for a certain amount of time every night. So there was a direct correlation between the positive behaviors and the privilege of getting the phone. Now we want to be careful though, because we don't want to bribe. And that can be a default behavior for families, is I'm gonna bribe you, So if you go to therapy, I'm gonna, give you $10 every time you go to therapy. Like, I would not recommend that. One of the things that I would say is that using those reinforcers ahead of time can become very manipulative. But when we notice after the fact, then people still feel seen and heard and noticed, and that becomes about relationship, right? So the difference is, hey, I want you to go to therapy, so I'm going to pay you to go to therapy, versus, hey, I noticed that you went to therapy today. I'm so proud of you taking that step. Let's go get some coffee, right? Do you see the dynamic difference in that? That the first one is about control, the second one is about relationship. And we always want to make this about relationship. So again, these are just some ideas, and you can come up with your own, but it is really critical. And this is even when you think about the 12 steps and how, when somebody goes to a meeting, I mean, they will work their program one day at a time so they can get a little piece of plastic that has a number on it. But that little piece of plastic is a motivator for them to stay in recovery. And it's really, really critical. This also could be something like, you know, supporting their efforts to go to the gym, or supporting their efforts to connect with the recovery community. So those are some ways that we can reinforce positive behaviors. Now we're going to talk about boundaries, and I always leave this for last, right? And the reason is because almost all the time my families come in and they're like, I need to set a boundary. I need to set boundaries. And they, first of all, they don't understand boundaries. And second of all, they always go to, I need to control these behaviors, and they're not in relationship. So we always say, boundaries without, love without boundaries is self-harm. Boundaries without love is control and manipulation, right? So we have to have both love and boundaries. And so the assumption is that I am in connection. If I am not in connection, then boundaries, you know, really shouldn't even be a part of the conversation. What are boundaries? And people mistake what boundaries are, because typically people come and set boundaries because they want someone to change. And you see this in, you know, documentaries like Intervention, where they're using leverage and disconnection to get someone into treatment. And those really are boundaries. Boundaries are safety fences so that I can show up in my values and love you well, right? Brene Brown says the most compassionate people she's ever met are people that have the strongest boundaries. So boundaries help me be safe so that I can be in relationship with you, right? They allow us to make generous assumptions about other people. So when I'm living in my boundaries and I have safety fences around me, I'm not easily taken advantage of. And so I can think the best about people, and I can make generous assumptions. For example, if I have a boundary that I'm not giving money, then I can just like accept where you're at and you know, assume that what you're saying is true because it doesn't really impact me. So for example, they come to you and they say they've been robbed and beaten blind and they don't have any money, right? But your boundary in that is you're still not going to give them any money. This allows us to make the assumption that they're telling the truth and that you can show up compassionately because there might be some truth in what they're saying. And whether they are or aren't telling you the truth, it doesn't impact you because you have a boundary. Does that make sense to people? Hopefully that makes sense to all of you. So when I have boundaries, such as, you know, some people do have safety boundaries that really make it so that their loved one can't be in their home. And we don't judge that. Like, we don't judge if somebody is in the home or is not in the home. What we will do is look at is the mom, the dad, the partner, the person, the loved one, the family member able to live their life in a meaningful way. And if, for example, they have someone coming into their home, in and out of their home, and they're in active use and they're nodding off, and it's too hard for the family member to even show up in her life because she's so worried, we might suggest a boundary that maybe they can't live there anymore. And there's a long way between all or nothing, as I mentioned. So there might be interim boundaries. Now, this may seem somewhat controversial or hard to even believe, but we have a woman in our group. She's a partner. Her husband was using meth, and they have 3 kids. And she learned, these compassionate responses, how to validate and affirm. She was in relationship with her husband. She was taking a completely non-judgmental stance. And she communicated a boundary, and she's like, it is not safe for you to come into our home when you are using. And they came to it, and he wasn't using all day, every day, but he was using enough where it was problematic. And they came to an agreement. They set up a cot in the garage. And so when he was using, when he went out and used, when he came back, he stayed in the garage. Right? He slept in the garage. Now, I know that sounds really mean, but I will tell you that in California, everybody has garage apartments. So it's maybe not as bad as you think it is. But it was a compromise. And then when he came out of his use episode, he walked in the door and was able to engage with his children. And I know that seems really far-fetched, and it's not for everybody, but that's where no one size fits all. We have to look at each individual situation. What can you do? What can't you do? For example, I had another family, and they had two minor children in the home. It was a husband and wife and two minor children. The 16-year-old was in active marijuana use, and the 13-year-old was living at home. Now, before you judge, I need to share that in Minnesota, once someone turns 15, you can't force them into treatment, and they have to give consent for behavioral health. He was smoking marijuana, and he would not give consent. Yet they were legally liable for both him and his sister. And so they ended up getting separate residence because the younger sister made a report to CPS because the brother was using in the home. They could not force this young man to stop using, and they were not willing to kick him out of their home. Therefore, they got separate apartments. And again, it sounds extreme, but it worked. So boundaries are so that we can show up, right? It's not a means to an outcome. It's not a way to make someone hit rock bottom. Balancing boundaries and love. That is, what we want to do.
Yeah.
I'm hold
Pam,
on
do you have a
1 second.
minute to take a sure.
Yeah, there's I think my Alexa is on and it's picking up some background noise. Okay, I think it went off now. Yes, is there a question?
Yep, there are a couple of comments in the chat. I just want to know if you want to take a minute to address some of those because I think they're relevant to where you are.
Okay.
So the first one was in relation to the Subway gift card with the social services agency. So Sheila was just asking so that in order for it not to be a bribe, you just not mentioning it ahead of time. That's the key piece to it because that's what makes it a bribe. And she was just clarifying that point.
Yes, that is correct. And at the same time, when it happened more than one time, he sort of came to expect it, right? Which again, isn't unlike harm reduction clinics. I will be right back. I am so sorry. Truly, Alexis turned on my, oh, I better not say that because it might sorry about that. So yes, that is really how the process worked was, he began to learn that if he went in, he would get a gift card. So there was a conditioning, and there is a conditioning, and that's the whole point, is that we're competing with the conditioning of substance use, right? And so what it does in the brain is it releases dopamine, and there's a positive reward. So we're in essence competing with that, which is why this reinforcing positive behaviors is so important. And was there another comment or question?
There was one more, and I would just invite Stephanie to confirm whether this has been responded to or not, but she was just asking, how do you as a family member get through the situations without losing your mind? Another colleague had responded with some helpful information in the chat. And I would just invite if there was anything you could also add to that, or if that's been answered.
Thank you for sharing that. And we're going to talk a little bit about self-compassion and support. And I think, especially with boundaries, this is where I think so for us in our organization in Minnesota, we provide one-on-one family peer recovery services to family members. And this is 90% of the people that we work with report that they've learned more about boundaries and feel more capable of setting boundaries as a result of the guidance, education, and support that they're getting. So this is where community and the 4 pillars of recovery: home, health, community, and purpose, they are exactly the same for the family member. And so having a community, people that can not judge you, that can understand, that will help you. And then I think like self-care is so important in all of this, which is, I remember when we were setting boundaries, starting to set boundaries with my son, and it was really, really, really hard. And we would just have to, my husband and I would just leave and take a ride in the car and just lean into one another. So having a ride or die couple of people that understand and can support you is really, really helpful as you start to set boundaries. So we have just what makes boundaries so difficult? There's some questions here that you can ask yourself. I think if we think about what holds us back from boundaries. So setting boundaries can be really difficult, but there are some things that get in the way of us setting boundaries. Now, some of that, obviously fear is a big one. We hear the death certificate or statistics, and we're afraid that when we set a boundary, or we ask someone to leave, or we stop paying for things, that they may end up dying. And that is completely understandable. And I'm going to validate that as I share vulnerably that we did lose our son. And we lost him in 2021 to an accidental overdose. But I will tell you that fear didn't stop his death. Fear stopped my life. And when we stopped living in fear and started connecting with our son, started building relationship with him, we now have the ability to look back with so much confidence and so much reassurance that in spite of a day, and it was just a bad day that ended in his death, we had built so much relationship because of these practices, right? Sometimes family patterns and past trauma will stop people from setting boundaries. We had a gentleman who was a dad, and he had been in active use when his son was young. And so as a result of that, he had a lot of guilt and felt like his son's addiction was his fault, and he really had trouble setting boundaries. He was just trying to sort of make up for all the things that he had done early on in his life. And he felt like his trauma had caused his son's addiction. And again, we have to sort of step out, and we have to do the best that we can to heal ourselves. So we should be working on all of our own personal recovery, but those things will get in the way of feeling like we can set boundaries. I have seen mothers in particular that have their own mental health issues and their own need to feel needed. We can often fall into those patterns, as I mentioned in the first week, of being a rescuer, or being being the person who is the one that always has to step in and always help. And sometimes that's our own serious mental health issues or behavioral health issues, where we so badly need to feel needed that we can't separate ourselves, right? So there are some things that can get in the way, and what we really want to do is encourage family members to do their own work. Get therapy, get mental health supports, start working your own recovery program. Because tolerating intolerable behaviors is self-harm. And when I use that phrase with families, it's all of a sudden they stop and go, wow, yeah, you are worth more healthy to your loved one than you are unwell. And so in order to work on your own health and well-being, you have to have boundaries. Like, we can't stay well if we don't have boundaries. And again, they're not to manipulate or control someone's substance use. They're so that we can show up well. Quickly, how do you communicate these boundaries? We have a process called the 4Fs. It's really simple. And there is a worksheet in there that talks about this. And we think this process is golden. So it's foundation, facts, feeling, and follow through. So this is a little bit based on the Dear Man DBT process, but your foundation is something really positive, some statement of connection. So that might look like, I know you've really been trying to move towards getting a new job or move towards recovery. I see you making this progress. But the other day, when you called me and asked for $30, that felt triggering to me. That felt like we were kind of back in the phase of when you were in active addiction and needing money. And I really felt taken advantage of in that moment. So, from here on out, I'm just like, I love you. I'll take your calls. I'll show up for your therapy. I will be there for you. I just can't give you any money. That was just a made up one that simple process, right? So the foundation is, I understand things are hard right now. Or it might be, I see you and I see the work that you're doing. Some sort of positive, or maybe it even is something like taking partial responsibility. I know that I have let this situation go on way too long, and I have answered your calls when I've been at work. But the other day, when my phone rang 15 times during the day, and I was trying to, work with my patients, I felt like I couldn't give my employer the attention that it needed to have. And so I'm going to shut off my phone during the day. I'll turn it on at 5 o'clock. We can touch base at 5:30 every day. And I would really love to touch base with you at 5:30 every day, because I do want to know that you're okay, right? So that's a simple process: foundation, facts, feelings, and follow through. So validating statements, facts, just the facts. If you guys remember Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. Feelings, there's 87 feelings on Brene Brown's feeling wheel. So you can kind of look at that and determine what you want to say there. Try to use something a little bit deeper than just I got mad or I'm angry. And then your follow through. And your follow through also, I think a really great skill in this is and I did it in the example. What I can't do is answer the phone during the day. What I'm willing to do is turn on my phone at 5 o'clock and answer your phone at 5:30. So you can make statements of what I can't support, but in that, it's really helpful to say what you can support, right? What I can't support is giving you money. What I will do is show up for you. And if you want to go out for dinner tomorrow night, I would be happy to buy you a meal. So there's an exercise in here about communicating limits and boundaries. And then finally, we talk a lot about self-compassion. Kristen Neff is the expert in that. If you want to go on to her YouTube channel and look at some things, I think in this whole process, what happens when we start to do cognitive work or learn skills and tools, we get into a mindset that we're not going to do it perfectly. And we try something and we fail and we beat ourselves up. We try something, we fail, and we beat ourselves up. And so then we adopt these shame statements, right? So a shame statement might be something like, I'm just never going to get this right. Or maybe I really am a terrible mom. And self-compassion is not the same as self-care. Self-compassion is reforming those negative narratives that we have about how we're walking through this work. And it's always yes and, I didn't do this perfectly, and I know I'm not going to do it perfectly. And right now in this moment, I'm going to give myself grace and I'm going to go take a walk. Right? So reframing those narratives that we've had about this situation. Self-compassion really is that I'm going to extend to myself the same love and grace that I extend to other people. In this, it's not a checklist. It's not, if I do this perfectly, then my loved one is going to get into recovery. Now, the data of CRAFT, and actually our own data that we've collected in the first year of the one-on-one work we've been doing with families, 50% report that their loved ones have moved towards recovery. But you know what that means? 50% are still in it, right? 50% are still in the struggle, in the journey. And I think also noticing those small things and that small progress that you've made in this process. Well, I couldn't do this big boundary of I can't kick my loved one out. So everybody in my community, everybody in my family is telling me I need to kick my kid out. I can't kick my kid out. I am just an enabler, or I am just codependent, right? That's a shame statement that you might be telling yourself. Self-compassion is reframing that. Well, right now, I don't feel like I'm in a position where I'm comfortable asking my loved one to leave, but what I can do is set this boundary. Or I can be okay with that. That's not where I'm at right now. Oftentimes when we do think about how we're making these decisions and we're making them with intention, it allows us to create a greater space for self-compassion, right? And just understanding that I can just for today show up with intention and do the best that I can. Sometimes self-compassion might include a gratitude journal. Sometimes self-compassion might only come about by really leaning into a relationship where someone can support you really well. But it really has a lot to do with what am I telling myself about the situations that I am in. And just like the individual with substance use goes through a process of change, and it might take years, you're in that same process. You're in that same journey. And thinking about what I can't do today, but what I can do today. That applies to you in your own life too. Maybe I can't go do my CrossFit class at the gym today, but maybe I can just go for a walk. And that will help me connect with my true self. And I think that reminding ourselves of the truth, and one of the things that we do in our group is we always state a win. We always state what's right with you, because I understand that in this process, you have people that are telling you that you're doing it wrong. You're going to have those people telling you that through this whole process. And especially if you start to use a kinder, more compassionate process of dealing with substance use in your family, there will be people, including, and I just had a mom where it was her pastor that was like, really in the tough love, cut him off, don't give him anything, let him hit rock bottom camp. And so there will be well-meaning people in your life that will tell you that you're doing it wrong. And, you Self-compassion allows us to stay the course, right? It allows us to be human. It's okay to not be okay. And that's when we can make our world small and lean into the people in our lives who really want to support us in this process. So with that, we have a little bit of time left, just a few minutes to close up. If there's any final question, and Stephanie, I like living with someone for 9 years is really hard. Like that's a hard, one thing I do want to encourage you is that the average length of use is 10 years. So like, hold on, it might happen tomorrow. And I think that's one of the things that was helpful, that's helpful for families is like this could change tonight. Anything could change. And when you hear people in recovery share their stories, there are wild, miraculous stories of like, I went to bed one night and I had a dream in the middle of the night and I woke up and I made a phone call. Like for real, I've heard that story from someone who's now in long-term recovery. So we just don't know. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know when, things will come to fruition. And I'm just the final thought on this, and then I'll be quiet. But one thing I will say, and I say this often, is when Jake was 13 or 15, he was in his first treatment, and his therapist said, he could die from this. And I thought to myself at that time, if he died, how would I have wanted to live my life during his active use? And we don't know what the outcome of this disease is. I also have a daughter fighting brain cancer and a husband fighting his own cancer battle. And so for me, this was not about death. This was about life. This was about how I could live my life with intention in a meaningful way, improve my relationships with my family, align my values, and show up in love. And so I just want to encourage you that while no one size fits all and there is no right or wrong, there is one thing that is always right, and that is kindness, and that is compassion, and that is empathy for those people that are suffering from substance use. So I will end it on that note.
Thank you, Pam, for sharing. There are so many great messages in the chat. So while you're taking a minute to take those in, I want to encourage everybody to continue to share your thoughts, your questions for Pam. We're going to continue to wrap up this session. We'll end the recording, and then we'll open it up for questions for Pam. So if you would like to stay on to continue to ask questions, we invite you to do that. We're going to go ahead and invite you all to just wrap up with our session today. We're doing the feedback survey. There's a QR code there to be able to do that if you want to use your phone. We'll also put a link in the chat here. Let me just pop that in real quick. So you're welcome to hit that link and go there if you're not a smartphone person. After today's session, we'll be putting the content up, the slides, and the video from today's session. So you'll have all 3 parts available through ROTA-RC's website that you'll be able to go back and review these great sessions that we've been able to have with Pam at your leisure to review this great content. Please give us about 7 days. We've been able to get the content up, I think, a little bit shorter than that, but just making sure that we get the closed captioning in. So hopefully by Monday, we'll have this 3rd and final session up. And we'll get that link out to everybody who registered. Certificates of attendance will be available for everyone who participated in the sessions. We'll get those out hopefully by the end of next week, if not sooner. So just want to make sure that you have all of that. There will be instructions for those of you who are looking for CEUs from the session. Although the Technical Center does not offer those, we'll provide information to be able to help you get that from your licensing board in your state. Lastly, I also want to make sure that you get all the information to get in touch with the ROTA Information Center. Again, I'm going to pop that into the chat. How to access via email to ask your questions, get in touch with us to make sure that you get access to the website we talked about earlier, to connect with us. If you would like to sign up to our newsletter to learn more about trainings like this that we've got from Pam and more that we have coming up, which we're going to talk about in a minute. To connect with us via Facebook, we've got a lot of great partners who connect with us there. We share great resources, and to just connect with us via technical assistance if you are in a county or community within our region that would like to learn more about how to do community capacity building. Excuse me there. And then lastly, I just want to let you know what we've got coming up yet this end of the summer, moving into the start of fall, dare I say it. But we've got building impact programs using the logic model framework for program design and outcome measurement. That will be Tuesday, August 6th, 10 to 11 Central, 11 to noon Eastern. And then following that, we've got the harm reduction gap implications for public health and medical providers. That will be Thursday, September 5th, noon to 1:30 Central, 1 to 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. Those programs will both be hosted by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension. So we thank our host partner for providing those opportunities. And you never know, we're adding new webinars and programming all the time. So we're going to go ahead and stop the recording there.